Hi, everyone. It is Wednesday, February 19th. My name is Matthew Woodruff. I am an assistant professor at Emory University. I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Audio Immunity, and apparently now also a YouTube channel of the same name. That's Audio Immunity. And I wanted to start with three things today. The first is that I'm not a video editor. I'm not particularly good in the visual format. I realize that. I recognize it. Maybe that'll change over time. Maybe it won't. But all that is to say, thank you for watching these videos. I hope that the information at least is somewhat helpful. If it is, if you wouldn't mind subscribing and liking these videos, it does help reach a further audience. So again, thank you, fully acknowledging that the visual quality of the content is poor, to say the least. For what it's worth, I'm recording on a Zoom instance. So there you go. Second, I really appreciate those of you that have reached out and expressed concern about policy changes through the National Institute of Health, through Health and Human Services, all of these things that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. Many of you have reached out and expressed concern about me, about my lab, about my family, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. There is a lot going on to support folks that are being more directly impacted by this, at least immediately, in and around the Atlanta area. There are protests at the CDC that are going on currently. There are a lot of things, but just expressing your concern to me has been a huge help, and I appreciate that. So anyway, I will continue to try to provide information where I can and support you all. The third thing is that it has come to my attention that I have been making a factual error when talking about some of the changes coming to Health and Human Services. And that is that the National Science Foundation, the NSF, is not actually a subsidiary department of Health and Human Services. It is a standalone, congressionally mandated department, agency, foundation. So the NSF is dedicated to the investigation of basic science and technology and all kinds of other things in our country. So again, it is a federally funding grant agency, and it is not under the purview of Health and Human Services. And that's relevant because, as we've been discussing, there have been a lot of changes within Health and Human Services, and specifically the National Institute of Health. A lot of those changes have been pushed to the forefront now by the nomination of RFK Jr. So we'll see how HHS responds, but none of that impacts the National Science Foundation. But don't get that confused with they're okay. They're not okay. Those of you that follow this kind of thing know that there has been some motion within the National Science Foundation. And in particular, there was a release of some communications out of the US Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And this is an organization that obviously looks to oversee or at least keep tabs on commerce, science, and transportation in the United States. Some of you may know the chair of that committee. It is Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. And I just want to read this headline quick, which is posted on their committee website. And the headline reads, Cruz-led investigation uncovers $2 billion in woke DEI grants at NSF, releases full database. We'll come back to that. In the meantime, it occurred to me the other day as I was thinking about what I want to actually do with this channel that you all don't really know what I do in the lab. So let me give you a 5-minute overview and tell you a little bit about why it is that I've decided to start making these videos. So my lab, I am an immunologist, and that means that I deal with all things immune system, mostly human immune system, but we do work in mouse models to understand a little bit better how human immune systems eventually work. Specifically, within immunology, I am a B cell biologist for the most part. We dabble in a couple other places, but B cells, you may know, as the antibody producers within the white blood cell compartment in your blood. So when you're talking about getting infected with something like COVID-19, where I did a lot of work, if you're talking about getting a vaccine and producing an antibody response against that vaccine, these are the kinds of questions that my lab asks. Specifically, my lab asks the question, when your immune system decides that it's going to produce antibodies, it has to make some big decisions about which kinds of antibodies to produce. And one of the biggest things that your immune system does when choosing to produce antibodies is it has to make sure that the antibodies that it produces are against the thing that you want to protect from and not against your own cells and tissues. And some of you may know that when your immune system fails to do that effectively, when it fails to recognize what is the difference between self and non-self, you end up with things like autoimmune disorders. And these are disorders where your immune system has lost sight of what is foreign and has started producing antibodies that target your own cells and tissues and can cause destruction. So, for example, in a case like lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder that we study routinely, you can produce antibodies against your own DNA, for example. And as you can imagine, that produces a whole host of problems for the patient. So you can get kidney failure, you can get rashes, you can get all kinds of things that lead to really serious outcomes. So that decision-making process around which B cells in your body are the ones that you're going to select to produce antibodies to make sure that you're protected from the things that are foreign and tolerant of your own cells and tissues. That is what my lab focuses on. And we do this in a couple interesting ways. We do this in a vaccine space where we use the information that we gain about how antibody selection works to try to design vaccines that target specific parts of the vaccine that are much more productive and protective. In autoimmune diseases, we study how to understand or how to use our understanding of when this process goes wrong in order to create new medicines to try to prevent those cells from causing the destruction that they cause. And we basically broadly apply this understanding of B cell biology, B cell selection to a whole bunch of different translational spaces. So vaccination, autoimmunity, infection response, all of these things. So those are the questions that my lab asks. And I explained to you before that the way that an academic science lab works is that we submit ideas for funding through agencies like the National Institute of Health, like the National Science Foundation, all of these things. And we explain in that grant why the questions we're asking are important and how much essentially it would cost in order to run the experiments, in order to figure out whatever answer it is that we're looking to answer, right? So we're constantly submitting grants. That is our lifeblood. It's how science works. And so my grants in my lab realistically come from three different places. Right now, we've got a number of grants from the NIH, and I'm not the lead in any of those. I'm doing work for other people's grants, but still fairly impacted there. The second place is the Department of Defense. So I have a grant through the Department of Defense looking to push a new type of mRNA-based vaccine technology out into the market. Not into the market, I mean, we're in the really basic stages, but we've got what I think are some pretty cool ideas as to how we can get our immune system to fine-tune their responses onto specific, really protective places in a vaccine. And so some of that preliminary work is funded through the Department of Defense. And the third place is we're doing some really cool work on nanomedicines with this other agency within Health and Human Services, ARPA-H. And that project is really exciting, actually. We're doing some cool collaborative work with people here at Emory and other institutions. And so we're very excited about how that's progressing. All that is to say that there are two ways, I think, that people, really scientists, are starting to approach this new wave of not necessarily regulations, changes in policy, all of those sorts of things, right? The first way is to sort of hope that it doesn't hit you, I suppose. And this is not unreasonable, right? We all employ folks, right? I employ 4 people in my lab currently. And the grants that I just mentioned really are how those people get paid, how experiments get run, and ultimately how my career ends up progressing. So it makes some sense just to not say anything, um, talk quietly to the NIH, talk to our administration internally, all of those things. That is a reasonable approach because to attract attention in an environment like this, I think can probably be dangerous. We'll find out. But there's another approach that I personally think is the right one here, and that is to be loud and be visible and explain to people what's going on. I've taken that approach because it is my belief that the purpose here is not restricted to any one effort, right? I talked about indirect costs the other day and capping of indirect costs, which is terrible. It would sink a lot of major universities, and it's been stayed by a federal judge. That's fine. One could argue that there were unintended consequences off to the side of enacting a policy like that. But I don't think that the reprieve from that policy should be an indication that there aren't more policies coming, right? I am under the belief that there are probably 10 or 15 different efforts right now, and they're all targeted in the same place, which is the biomedical and general research space. It is my belief that there is an intentional targeting of academic institutions. I don't necessarily even know that there's a reason for it other than it feels both threatening to the current administration to have people speaking with authority outside of their own voices. But I think also more importantly, there's a lot of red meat that has to get thrown around at the beginning of this administration. And it's very clear that academic science is not held in high regard within that group. So it is my belief that these policies are individual policies that maybe individually can be hid from, but I believe that there is a larger problem trying to do science in this administration. I think it's going to get worse and not better. And I think that it is not necessarily targeted in any meaningful way. I think it is simply targeted at the broad question of should we continue to allow these people, me, my colleagues, to do the work that they claim to do, or is it better to sort of silence that arm and fill that information space with alternative information? So here's why. I mentioned that we would come back to that NSF database that Ted Cruz just launched into the world. He called it neo-Marxist policy implementation. Right? So he's finding woke DEI grants from the NSF. And that's how it's being largely reported in the media right now. You can type woke DEI grants or whatever into your Google search bar, and you can find reporting from a lot of major institutions around the country talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and those policy shifts that are sort of banning all of those things. But I took a look at the actual database, and I'll link to the database if you want to take a look at the database. And we just took a look through and found a couple of the policies, or found a couple of the grants that are woke DEI neo-Marxist policy. Let me read a couple to you. Let's see. Award ID 344. Bridging the Gap Between AI and Machine Learning and Engineering Applications project funds research into integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning into engineering disciplines. The initiative seeks to optimize industrial and infrastructure systems through AI-driven solutions. This grant supports AI adoption in fields such as mechanical and civil engineering. Let's see. The Core National Ecosystem for Cyber Infrastructure project builds advanced computational resources for scientific research and big data applications. It supports large-scale simulation, AI modeling, and high-performance computing infrastructure to accelerate discoveries in various STEM fields. The initiative aims to improve U.S. research competitive in computational sciences. We'll do one more here. This project funds the Airborne Phased Array Radar, APAR, a next-generation weather observation system operated by the National Center for Atmospheric Research. APAR will enhance the ability to study severe storms, hurricanes, and atmospheric changes over oceans and remote areas, closing data gaps in meteorological research. The project integrates cutting-edge radar technology to improve severe weather forecasting and disaster preparedness. So those are the neo-Marxist policy DEI initiatives that the US Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation has identified and stricken from public funding. So trying to get a good handle on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the intersection between those spaces, and making sure that we are well prepared for storm and disaster preparedness. This is why I think it's important to speak out rather than be quiet. These are not actually targeted at DEI initiatives. Some of them are, right? Certainly you can go into that database and find all kinds of support for minority communities, people with a history of being pushed out towards the ends or edges of science. And in fact, Emory has a $10 million NSF award trying to help traditionally Black colleges and universities trying to build their research infrastructure to allow for an equitable approach to research across all of our universities and drawing from talents across individual institutions. So some of that is certainly DEI focused, but the focus here is not DEI. It's not neo-Marxist policy. It is slashing and hacking at the federal research infrastructure and the academic research infrastructure, because that space is dangerous and it's uncontrollable in their mind. The ideas that we present are not the ideas that they want to present. And so I personally do not believe that they're going to stop at any given policy. I don't believe that we should be in the business of self-censorship, although I will admit to you that I'm about to submit a grant where I have scrubbed the use of the word diversity when discussing how two different immune systems might interact to the same thing, right? The basic science of how people with different immune systems might react to a vaccine is something that I no longer can directly discuss in a grant, because I know that it's going to be found Control F diversity tagged and not discussed in an NIH study section. So I don't believe that we should be in the business of self-censorship. And I'm certainly not interested in pretending like randomly laying off 10% of the NSF workforce, as was done this past week, is something that we should be sitting around and not discussing. These are people, as we discussed last time I came on and did this, they have lives. There is absolutely no reason to do it except to point at the NSF and say, look, we made it more efficient by reducing the number of heads, which simply doesn't make science more efficient. That's not how it works. You need a much more tuned approach to that. It's very clear with the release of this database that it is embarrassingly untargeted. So we will end it there, I think, today, hopefully with a better understanding of what my lab does and why it is that I'm coming to you. So until next time, again, please do like and subscribe if you find this information useful. If we gain some traction, I promise I'll start learning how to actually use YouTube to some sort of effect. And also, if you're around the Atlanta area, the Decatur area, please do be on the lookout for ways to engage maybe at the local level and start to make an impact, start to use your voice, because I think this is a situation that requires that we all think about how to use our voices together. So thank you all. Have a good day.